Hey team, welcome to Anime Shoshin. My name is Blake and this is Merve.
Yo.
And on today's episode, I'm very excited to be talking about the second half of Ranking of Kings.
This is the Anime Shoshin. Are you ready?
We also did an episode on the first half, so if you listen to this and you're interested in that, feel free to go back and listen, or I guess you could go back and listen to that and then listen to this one if you want to do it in order.
It might be interesting to see how we were feeling at first and then how we feel at the end.
Yeah.
Here's what you do. Open up a second window, leave this playing, start the other one, kind of jump back and forth.
Yeah, there you go.
Then listen to them both all the way through.
Yeah, again. Yep.
Yeah.
And then download them as well.
And then like them.
Yeah, and do a review that's positive.
Yes, a positive review. Yes, if you liked what you heard.
All right, so...
I mean, at this point, I'll take 4 stars. 4 out of 5.
Yeah, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. It reminds me, though, of like my sales management days where we would appreciate it if you would give us a 10 out of 10 survey. And if I didn't do something to warrant a 10 out of 10, please let me know what it is so I can fix it before you leave. It was very on the nose and not cool.
I also have sales. I don't really mind. Please give us a 5. Because the problem is, and you know this, and for everyone listening, the problem is people tend to like hedge.
Yeah.
So they tend to not give 1s unless something really egregious happened. And so if it's like they were a little upset about something, they'd give a 2, and they tend to not give 5s because like, oh, there's always room for improvement. But the problem is every business scorecard's on 5s only.
Right.
That's a little insight.
Or 10s.
Yeah, or 10s, whatever the star rating is.
Yeah, if it's 5, you only get it if it's 5, and if it's 10, you get it if it's 9 or 10. You usually get a promoter score for that. But I always like kind of the alternate version of just letting people know the truth about it, which is what you're saying.
Yes, that was my move. Yeah, I just go like, hey, it really helps us out if you give us a 5 or scorecard on 5.
Exactly.
I still go into places and they always get freaked out because I'm like I'm way about customer service. So if there's like, if someone offers me something or does something, I'll go like, oh, are you scorecarded on this? Oh, no, I just want to know because I want to help you out. It's not because I'm like trying to gotcha. I want you to be successful at your job.
Yeah, it's good to have that empathy when you're dealing with people who have to deal with customers. So it does catch them off guard.
Right.
All right, so let's get into our rating of Ranking of Kings.
Okay.
Will you recommend this to us? First comes Rock. John Kenpon.
Here we go. First comes Rock. John Kenpon.
I'm giving this a 1. Nah, it's a 5.
I was gonna say something. I'm like, there's just no way. I'm just gonna let it sit until he decides.
Until he just says the truth. Yeah, it's a 5.
Yeah,
it's
a 5 for me as well. And frankly, I'm just gonna put this out there. If anyone were to ask me right now, like, hey, right now.
Hey, wait, hold on to this because I know what you're gonna say.
Okay.
And I was gonna broach this with you after the show, but we'll just do it on the show.
Sure.
I think we should do a 3rd Ranking of Kings video where we find someone who says they don't like anime.
Yeah.
Make them watch the season of Ranking of Kings.
Right.
And then come on and talk to us and see if they can point to what they don't like. If it's just it's a cartoon, then there's nothing you can do about it. But there's very little to dislike here.
That's a great idea. Do you know anyone like that?
I do have a friend who is also a writer who I might be able to convince to do it.
Okay.
But I don't know 100%, but I was going to broach the subject with him. There's also another podcast host that I was talking to on Twitter. He's like, my son loves anime, but I hate it.
That'd be good. Yeah, so maybe broach the subject because everyone I know likes anime, so it would be hard for me to find
my one writer friend. He tried watching Death Note, and he's like, "Oh, everyone said it was so good, and I didn't like it at all." And I have not watched Death Note. I know that's one that we're getting to, like we have in the ether of
Death Note is very cerebral, so I will be very surprised if you don't enjoy it.
Yeah, I feel like I would, and I was kind of surprised. I mean, I don't know if it's just a cartoon. I'll talk to this is. Yeah. We can cut most of this out.
Or not. But anyway, yeah, if you know anyone, that would be sweet. Have those conversations. I love that idea as an episode. But obviously, I give this a 5.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely one of my favorite, if not my favorite anime, like, ever.
I would think it's my favorite ever.
Yeah.
My most favoritist.
It's amazing.
I think you were about to talk about it, and then I interjected real quick to get my idea in.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's good. We made it. We got all the things said.
Mm-hmm.
So next, I would like to go through my what it's about.
It is necessary to set the record straight regarding our tale. You must study this series of events. You may find more. You may not.
And most of my what it's about is going to be the second half, which is what we're talking about today. However, I would like to start with some direct quotes from the very beginning of the very first episode, because this will kind of matter as we talk about the series. So at the very beginning of the first episode, there's a little bit of narration, and this is what they say. What is the measure of a king? Are there many prominent knights in his service? Are his subjects fruitful and his towns thriving? And above all else, does he himself bear the power of a hero? These are the measures by which the nations determine the ranking of kings. And if anyone listens to that, I bet you my inflection points are the same as the narrators were. Just a side note. But then we cut to Boji's mom, and she's talking to little Boji, and she says, "Oh, Prince, were they bullying you again?" And Boji's crying. And she says, "Never you mind them. You are stronger than they know. You can persevere through all that ugliness, and then you must become the greatest king in all the world. Promise me." So this is what, at its core, Ranking of Kings is really about. It's the journey of Boji going from being a bullied individual who has no strength to being quite powerful. So we fast forward to about halfway through the series, and Boji has just finished up his training, and he's returning to his kingdom, and he returns not in time to save everyone from the various beasts and villains, which I thought was kind of cool as a side note. Like, the tropey bit would be just about when everyone's gonna get their butt kicked, Boji shows up to save the day, and that is not what happens. But once the immediate threat has been dealt with, Boji and Kage head towards the underworld to return all the underworld creatures who were being controlled by the evil Miranjo. Dorsha, who's one of the big 4 warriors in the kingdom, he says he's grown quite admirably in such a little time. And Queen Hilling says, "Yes, of course, he's my boy after all, expect no less." Meanwhile, Domus and Hojiro are also under the castle. They're tasked with closing the gate to the underworld. The gate itself was made by Miranjo out of the corpses of Kage's race. Like all the other
Shadow Clan.
Yeah, Shadow Clan. All the other Shadow Clan were killed, and their dead bodies were used to make this gate to the otherworld, which was pretty gruesome if you think about it. Then Domus gets kicked right in the balls by Desha, who's the king of the underworld, which was an amazing scene to me. I love that.
It was really funny.
I just love the king of the underworld, Desha's attitude. Then Boji and Kage, because they're all going to the same place, they run into Domus and Hojiro and the king of the underworld and everyone else that's around. And Boji freaks out when he sees Domus, who was, if you've watched the first half of the series, his would-be murderer. Boji starts kicking his own ass to kind of calm himself down. He does this a couple of times in the series, and I think it's kind of an interesting character psychology, and it's a little like it makes you cringe a little bit. It's very interesting. Domus, who feels so guilty, then tries to kill himself by jumping off a set of stairs. He lands right on his head and fails to kill himself. And he says something like, "Damned this overtrained body."
Master Domus! I can't even die! What the hell hell are you doing, you moron? Have you gone insane?
Hakuro! This overtrained body is a cruel joke!
So that whole section, I think, was equal parts comedy and tragedy. It was very, very well done, because you're laughing 1 minute and then you're thinking about the seriousness of what's going on in the other. Is very, very good. Then after that, we get the story of the three brothers of the underworld. And in my opinion, what is a very cool take on immortality with the brother Oken. Then we go back to the castle, and Miranjo's evil starts to crack because of what Daida does to her in the place of souls. And no, Daida doesn't do sex stuff to her. It was something about like standing up for against bad people, that type of thing.
Oh.
Meanwhile, Oken is destroying everyone, just wrecking everyone, because he's immortal and he's like this unstoppable force. And then at the very last moment, Kage blows up in size and eats Oken, which I thought was cool because this was set up earlier with the portals made out of the corpses of the Shadow Clan, so I thought that was cool. Then Oken rips through Kage, messes everyone up again, and Kage, Boji, and Despot end up in the lands between. So Oken is a very stressful villain to have to deal with because of that immortality. Then we kind of bounce back and forth between the real world and the lands between. In the lands between, Boji's mom says to Miranjo, "My son grew up strong, didn't he? Not even you could kill him. And there are many who would protect him with their lives. Can you say the same?" I thought that was a very impactful statement, and it was obviously impactful on Miranjo, the character, too. And then back in the land of the living, the big four, like the toughest warriors in all the land, are just getting wrecked by Oken again.
He has more than immortality. He literally can't be killed. So if you cut off his head, a black goo comes out and just reattaches his head. If you break his sword, a black goo comes out and reforms his sword. It's like he cannot be killed.
Yep, very true. Miranjo, the villain, starts to second guess herself even more. And King Boss, the weakest strong character in the show, and I will explain that more later, neutralizes Oken. And also because he's in Daida's body and there's like healing magic in that side of the family, he heals everyone as well.
His power is also super condensed because he's a giant and he's in like a 10-year-old's body.
Yeah.
And they make mention of that, like all that power condensed into like it's like the Campbell's soup cream of power.
Yeah, and as an aside, at first I was kind of bummed of like, I thought the healing was like a surprise power, but then they do talk about it, that because he's in Daida's body and Daida's healing son and healing has, so it makes sense. But at first I was a little, and I was like, oh, I guess they do explain that. And after that, speaking of condensed, King Boss takes Oken, crunches him down to a little ball like the size of a softball, and sticks him in a rock so he can't come back to life. And as King Boss sticks Oken in a rock, now it's up to everyone to stop King Boss next. He's like the next boss level to fight. Kage says to Boji, "Boji, forget what I said earlier, don't fight him." And Boji says, because that's how Boji talks. And then Kage says, "It's definitely not okay." And I won't spoil how this happens, but Boji defeats King Boss and Miranjo, and then has to decide whether to stay king or be friends with Kage and go on adventures. So I cut it a little short at the end there because there's just so much good there. And if anyone is listening and you haven't watched the whole thing yet, I just couldn't bring myself to wreck that bit. But
I'm gonna though in a second.
Okay, fair enough. But that, in my own words, is what the second half of Ranking of Kings is about. So, Merve, why don't you tell us from a writer's perspective, how did they do with this second half? How did they do concluding the story? Was it satisfying? You know, all that kind of stuff.
Regale us with your wit, storyteller.
Yeah, so much I could talk about here. Tone was one that I was thinking about. And also the choices, like you mentioned, he literally has to choose between his brother or his father. Does he fight his father, which kills his brother? Does he fight his brother, which kills his father? But the one thing I wanted to really talk about was that choice you talked about at the end and what that means for Boji as a character. So every good character and every great character has a want and a need. The want is something external that we all know. In this case, Boji wants to be king. That is his goal. He sets out to become king and then to become the best king. His inner need is that he needs someone to believe in him because no one does.
Yeah.
Throughout all of this, we see him being made fun of by all the townspeople. We see his mother choose his brother over him. We see his father steal his power. As Boji gets stronger in a cool way, which we'll talk about later, but not here, people start to follow him. So he starts to kind of build this, and like what his mom said, there's a bunch of people who would die for him. And it's for various reasons. Dumas, because he tried to kill him and he's trying to get his like honor back. He wants his redemption. And I'll talk about that later too, because that's an amazing kind of psychological character moment between those two.
For my betrayal, I can only atone with my death!
What?
But Boji, who is on this quest to become king, ultimately gets what he wants, to be king. But that's not what he needs. Spoilers, he gives it all up to go on adventures with Kage, who believed in him almost from the start. He never had to prove anything to Kage.
Yeah.
Kage saw in him the innocence, the goodness, the stuff that basically changed Kage without him even knowing it. And so much so that Kage thought he wasn't valuable enough to hang around Boji now that he was king. So he ran away, and we had a come home Snoopy little moment where Boji had to go out and try to find Kage, where he reveals that he's given up his kingdom and put Daida back on the throne.
Yeah.
He's now on an express quest to build another kingdom and become king. And so that's still there, of course. But the best stories have a character that has this want and need, and the want ends up not mattering. Sometimes as a audience, you recognize, because the want could also be something bad or detrimental to the character. And you can recognize that they shouldn't really want this, but they need this other thing. But in cases like this is when it's the best, when what they want is actually also good.
Yeah.
He would be a good king. We believe he would be a good king, which is what the whole story is about.
Yeah.
What we as an audience think the whole story is about, Boji becoming king. Then we find out, no, that's not what it's about at all. It's about him fulfilling this need, this inner need, this psychological need of being wanted. And generally speaking, when you're building a character to have this kind of want and need, the want is something that's, like I said, external, and they know it. I want to date this girl in my office. I want to get this golden idol. I want to become a great fighter pilot, whatever it is. And then the need is something that they don't know, that they don't recognize. And often it's attached to a flaw. In this case, it's not really attached to a flaw.
No, it's more what others have kind of done to him.
Right.
And the need to have a solution to that. Yeah, the first time I watched it and that choice came up at the end, everything you've ever said in any of our episodes about the great choice at the end, or, you know, wants versus needs, I thought, oh, this is perfect, because all of that is wrapped up here.
Yeah.
And I also like to use the evil term that's being thrown around right now. I also like the great reset at the end. And what I mean by that is he's still going to be a great king. He's still headed towards being a great king. He's going to have both of those things, what he wants and what he needs, but he's going to do it kind of the right way, the way that makes him happy versus doing it the way that other people want him to do, which you also saw while he was being king, because everyone was telling him, everyone else was telling him how to be the king, right?
Right.
So now he gets to go do it his own way. So yeah, everything was just wrapped up perfectly in that choice.
And also, like, as I was watching this, I was like, how are they going to keep this going? Is this going to be one season only? And
yeah, so a quick note about that, since we're kind of moving into dis and favorite things, I'll throw a couple of things out there about kind of the production of it.
I see you have made your decision. Now let's see you enforce it.
So the dis side of it is, or the bad side is, the anime is now caught up to the manga.
Uh-oh.
Like, I think what happened was is this manga came out and it was so good that they were like, okay, we got to make an anime about this rat now. Not the mousy kind of rat, but rat now. So they did it. And now we've got to wait for the author to write more material to get more anime. So it's a bummer because I think it's going to be a while yet before.
Well, as long as they wait and they don't George R. R. Martin it.
Yeah, I don't see them doing that because they're saying like 2024 probably before we see more Ranking of Kings from an anime perspective. But the other thing I want to say is a plus, this was produced by the anime company. It's a big, huge anime company that people will see on a ton of anime that they watch called Kadokawa, Kadokowa. And when I was on the Simping for Senpai podcast, shout out to them.
Go listen.
Yep, go listen to their podcast. But when I was on there, one of the questions that came up is, who is your favorite anime production company? And I said Kadokawa. And I'm probably even saying it wrong, but they're still my favorite. And here's an example of one of the things that makes them so great. So Kadokawa is the anime company that made their president, the president of the company, Takeshi Natsuno, they made him take a 20% pay cut and submit an official public apology because he stated that the prevalence of sexual content in a manga needed to be reconsidered in the digital age or the modern age. So he made a statement about how manga needs to be censored for a modern audience. And the response by the company was to make him take a 20% pay cut and submit a public apology. So if that tells you anything about how they feel about censorship, I think that's pretty darn cool and something I can get behind.
Yeah.
But that's where I wanted to start with diss track and likes. What's something you've got on your list, Merve?
Well, since we kind of hit on it, I'll start with the tone, which is spot on. There are a lot of movies, and we've talked about a lot of Joss Whedon stuff and kind of picked on him, even though I like 90% of the MCU. But sometimes tonally, there's some weird stuff that happens. And when you're watching a movie and you feel squirmy or cringy, often that's a tonal issue. Someone's trying to be funny in an inappropriate time, or something is funny that isn't supposed to be funny, but this just fires on all cylinders in terms of tone. It's funny and it's sad and it's exciting and it's gripping, and it does everything with a very cartoony style. And still, I found myself tearing up more than I did in other more realistic Steins Gate or Cowboy Bebop or these other more realistic art styles.
Look, I'm a man. I'm not afraid to admit it. There were times where I'd be watching this with Jessica, and there would come a part where it was emotional, and I would start to feel a type of way like I was going to cry. So I'd put my hand over one side of my face so she couldn't see. And then she'd say something to me, and it'd take me a minute to respond. And she'd be like, "Are you okay?" And I'd be like, yeah, I'm not crying. You're crying. You know, that type of thing.
Are you crying? Am I crying? No, I'm not crying. You're crying. I'm not a crier. I don't cry. I work out.
I always do the fake cough so that I can rub my eyes, and it looks like they were watering because I was coughing.
This anime can get you for sure. There's one small diss I've got because I've watched this now like 3 times all the way through.
I have a few disses.
King Boss says some stuff about how he was the one who kept Miranjo from healing, but this is never really explored or explained in any meaningful way. So, I mean, I get that they want to make King Boss somewhat sympathetic because of his feelings for Miranjo, and they want to make it so that it's somewhat his fault that she is the way she is, but they didn't really sell that real well. So
yes,
I get it, but I think they could have taken that out and the story would have been the same. So it was just one of those things that was kind of unnecessary to me.
I have that almost exact same diss. Their relationship was awkward.
Yeah.
I didn't 100% understand it. She's like my daughter and my mother. Dude, that's weird.
Right.
That's messed up. Like, It almost seems like a romantic relationship, but It's like maybe he didn't take her because of a giantess, but then Hilling, obviously they had a child together, and you just don't even want to think of the logistics of that.
No, that is insane.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there's some biology there that is just not normal biology.
Right.
But then how would that work with the giant? Yeah, I don't even know.
You just don't want to think about it. You just want to let that go.
Right. Now, on the other side of this, one thing that I did really like about King Boss as a character is they're constantly talking about how he's the strongest person alive. But to me, after really watching this and really thinking about it, he's actually the weakest character in the whole series, which is interesting because physically he's the strongest, Boji's the weakest. But actually, to me, King Boss is the weakest and Boji is the strongest. And this is why. He's constantly playing both sides. He's constantly failing not to make decisions. He won't commit to one side versus the other. He doesn't take charge and lead. He's always following what Miranjo says to do, or, if he's talking to Dorsha about Queen Hilling, then he's on their side. So at first, when you watch it, it seems confusing because you're like, why is he playing both sides? But I believe it's because he's actually set up to be the weakest character in the series emotionally and leadership wise.
Yeah, you could say he's weak in character.
Yeah.
Not his character is weak, but he is
right.
the weakest in character. And Boji is the strongest in character.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the Boji side.
Okay.
We talked about how we're men, but we might have teared up from time to time a little bit.
Yeah.
But Boji, because of his innocence and overwhelming love of people, he garners so much sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
He is the perfect sympathetic character. People are always striving to make their character, writers are always striving to make their character sympathetic. And we've talked about ways to do that. And we've talked about ways to make your character likable, sympathetic. And one of the things that you can fall into is a victim character where a bunch of bad things keep happening to a character. And the writer's oh, but also they lost their job and their wife left them and their dog bit them and their truck broke down. And it's a country song. But all this kind of stuff does happen to Boji. He's deaf and dumb.
Mm-hmm.
He can't hear or speak, which is metaphorical. I'll talk about that too. But he has a way to turn almost every bad thing that happens to him into something good. And he almost never loses faith.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the first thing we see when he meets up with Kage is Kage steals some of his clothes, but they learn that they can communicate. Boji can read his lips somehow, his claw pinch her lips, and Kage can understand Boji. So what does Boji do is he comes back wearing 16 layers of clothes because Kage wants to quote unquote sell the clothes to make money because he's a thief. And it's this kind of here, take everything I have, this complete innocence that makes you absolutely love everything he does. Yeah. And he only has one big weakness, but I'll get to that later.
Well, and even that's brought further forward when he's walking back through town in his underwear. He's got the biggest grin, the biggest triangle grin on his face because he is excited to have someone to communicate with, to be, forging this relationship, even if it is one-sided. And as everyone in town is laughing at him and mocking him, and he knows exactly what they're saying because he can read lips, he's still walking through that town as confident and as happy as can be, which is very cool. Another thing I liked, and you broached this subject a little bit already, is that the writer knew the story kind of from Jump Street. And what's great about this is it adds to rewatchability a lot, because if you watch it more than once, one, I don't think it gets old, and two, you will pick up on a lot of things. For example, at the beginning, Daida dreams that he is engulfed in darkness and that Boji is his only hope for salvation. Then Daida decides he wants to get his father's power, which lands him in darkness with Boji as his only chance for salvation. And there's a lot of moments like this that get pulled forward on multiple viewings. There's a lot of Easter eggs in there. So I had that as a huge plus because so many, and Merve, I know you'll say the word for it, the technical word for it, but so many of them seem like they're being just kind of written
Yes.
as they go and not planned out, right?
Gardener being gardened.
Yeah.
Or Panzer, someone who flies by the seat of their pants. I'm 3.5 minutes into my 10-minute Chainsaw Man review, which is a big discussion about the gardener versus the architect. And a lot of the things we're talking about here, I think that this was a story that was architected,
Yeah.
outlined. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. But the things that happen with gardeners is you usually have kind of more crazy imaginative things, new characters pop up, and they're more episodic, generally speaking, because you're thinking, oh, well, what does he do next? Oh, he does this next, and you wrap that up. Architects usually have better foreshadowing and stronger endings, stronger conclusions, and I think this has that. Also, when you have very strong characters and you stick to their psychology, that stuff often falls into place too. So that it has both things going for it. But I would not be surprised to learn that this was outlined.
Well, and you've mentioned kind of Brandon Sanderson and his style and what he teaches for writing. And I've watched a few of his lectures at this point, and it made me think about something he says about how he outlines based off the awesome moments. So he thinks about, okay, what would be a really cool moment?
Yeah.
And all right, now I'm going to back into that moment with how we get there. And I feel like at the end, like Boji fighting King Boss, or, there's a few moments in there that it almost is like that's what they did, where they thought, okay, these are some awesome moments. Now I'm going to write into that, plan into that. So yeah, I thought that was
he says
pretty
he's
cool.
gotten a little better, but he used to do the Brandon Avalanche, you would call it, where 75% of the book is set up and then the last 25% is just everything coming down at once.
Yeah. Actually, I think that was mine. So what's your next one?
Well, I'm just going to go into the next kind of character psychology thing. Boji's biggest hurdle, his biggest fear, the thing that trips him up the most, isn't Oaken, the immortal warrior. It isn't his father and brother. It's Dumas. He can barely face Dumas.
Domus, yeah.
Dumas. He can barely face this dude because they were friends and he trained Boji and then betrayed him.
Yeah.
Boji had to really look at somebody who at one time was his mentor and good friend who had done the ultimate betrayal, the worst thing you can do to a person. And it was almost impossible for Boji to even look at him.
Yeah.
Because psychologically he was so broken by that moment. And so it was really cool, those moments where they interacted when they were like, well, you'll have to face him. And everyone's like, well, he's just this guy. You have to fight these bigger, stronger people later. He's just a mini boss. But he was the big boss for Boji because that's his biggest fear, that betrayal. Like, that's the only time he's really been confronted with that. And it makes him think, are people worth saving? They don't say that, but that's the psychology of it. Is everything I'm doing wrong? Am I overly... It's like the breaking of his innocence, the end of his innocence, or his naivety, to reface that moment, and he can barely do it.
I talked a lot about the part where they're kind of underneath the castle, but not in the underworld, and Domas and Hojiro and Desha and Boji and Kage, they all kind of converge. And the first time I watched it, I just kind of breezed through that. I didn't really think much of it. But this last time where I watched it, there is so much packed into that part of, there's just so much there. And one of my favorite things is exactly what you're talking about. And it was such a great surprise. So there's the moment where there's Kage and Boji and Domas and Hojiro. Hojiro and Domas both have their heads on the ground and they're like asking for forgiveness. And Kage's like, can you forgive them? Can you bring yourself to forgive them?
I like how you're doing the claw motion
with my
Kage.
hand. Yeah. And 99% of anything at that moment is where the Boji character would be like, yes, I forgive you.
Right.
And 99% of stuff. But because this is such a big deal, Boji's like, no, and runs off. Right?
Right.
And Kage's like, what do you expect? Do you expect him to forgive you after what you did? And just lays into him.
Kage immediately has his back.
Yeah.
It's like a true friend will have your back even when they know you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like you say something and it's like, you're wrong. I'm going to tell you you're wrong later. But right now, in this group of people, I got your back.
Yep.
I will back you up.
That's very true. So I love that wasn't it, and that it continued on, and then eventually there was that forgiveness, I think, at a more impactful point. A small diss I have before I get into some of the character related stuff I have. To me, the healing is a little overused. It almost
Yes.
becomes like MacGuffin-y.
I got that same exact, a bit too much, almost dead, in
Yeah,
quotes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the healing gets a little overused, but that's kind of an anime thing. And the characters, a lot of times we expect more characters to die in an anime that just doesn't happen. You know, characters just don't die as much. So I think, you know, that's forgivable for sure. So the characters, and you mentioned this earlier about the art style is very old school Disney. It's very sparse.
Mm-hmm.
Art wise, there's not a lot of busyness to it. It's very simplistic in that way. But somehow the characters feel more real than almost anything else I've watched. It's so dense character wise. We could literally sit here and do an hour on each character, on each episode. I mean, there's so much to it. And though the simple plot and the setting help, you talked about that in our first Ranking a King's episode. I mentioned this just now. I also think the animation helps with this too. The simplicity of the animation allows you to really mentally just kind of dive in with how complex the characters are. And something else that I even thought of that I thought was pretty genius is even the character names. Most of the character names are only like 4 or 5 letters. Domas, Boji, Kage. Even the names comparatively are pretty simple. So I think it's genius how the writer just keeps everything out of the way so you can just sit back and really appreciate the characters, which I think is awesome.
No, I think that's smart. The animation style is on the spectrum from realism to iconic. Realism being a photograph and iconic being like the smiley face, 2 dots and a colon, you know? This is more towards the iconic, which kind of lets the psychology of the characters seep through. So I'm going to talk about one of those characters. I mean, Boji it's hard to not have Boji as your favorite character.
Yeah.
But if he's not my favorite character, it's Queen Hilling.
Yeah, for sure.
She is such a good character. And the subtext of her character, where you always think, oh man, she's being a B word.
There's hardly a need. Clearly, this boy is not fit to be a king.
Or sometimes even a C word. And then in the secret moments, she's like a beautiful person.
Yeah.
And it's because she feels all this pressure to be the queen. And she keeps trying to push that onto Boji. This is how a king acts. You have to act like this. And she never says that. She never like has some woe is me moment where she's sitting like, oh, I have to keep this veneer on myself. We just see it through her actions. And again, it's kind of like what you were talking about with King Boss, where at first I'm like, oh, this character is a little wishy-washy. I don't know if the psychology. And then you see why it's the way it is. And you go, oh, this psychology is actually perfect. It makes total sense. And there's a moment where Queen Hilling breaks that character and hugs the boys.
Yeah.
Great work. You're both... Oh, my boys, my
Please,
sweet
Mother.
boys.
I'm too old for this kind of smothering affection.
Don't you talk back to me. And no objections from you either.
And I had to cough a couple times.
I was going to say, if I was ticking the amount of times I had to cough or put my hand up to the side of my face, I guarantee you more of those actually involved Queen Hilling and Boji, or just Queen Hilling, than just Boji. So
Right.
yeah, she was very, very impactful character. And when the cracks would show in that queenly demeanor, it was waterworks almost every time. I want to talk about another character real quick, Anne. So Anne is the female warrior who protects Hilling in like 2 episodes.
Okay, yeah, I didn't even know who you were talking about, honestly.
Yeah. And what's interesting is on like the 3rd watch of this really stood out to me about how amazing they've done with characters. So Anne is a female warrior who protects Hilling, and she says things like, fighting is our job and we'll take care of this, and she's very commanding. And watching it again, and what's cool when you watch something more than once is it almost like the show slows down for you a little bit, so
Right.
you can really pick things out more. She gets more development in 2 minutes of an episode than a lot of characters get in a whole series. I know more about who that character is and what her psychology is in that 2 minutes than I do about a ton of other characters in anime or otherwise. So that one little side character just showed how great of a job they did with the characters in this.
Yeah, and there were a lot of characters that had that kind of heroic aspect to them. The spearman, I still can't remember names, and then the bald guy with the scar on his mouth. And I would say
The one
go
guy
ahead.
that with the gray hair is Apis. It
Apis,
just popped into my head. Apis. And then the number one, he's the number one in Dorsha is the
Dorsha.
number one of the big four, the bald one that loses his foot. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a really cool character. And we've talked about this. This is one of the things people, I think, gravitate towards in anime is that heroic aspect of it. We've lost a lot of that in the West. I would argue that Spider-Man No Way Home has this in it, and that's one of the reasons why is it the number one movie of all time yet? Or it's like close,
I think
maybe
it
number
is.
two.
Theater-wise, yeah.
At a time when theaters are supposed to be dying.
Right.
And it's the biggest movie ever.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is because it has that heroism in it. And this is one of the best animes in terms of it has characters that go from hero to villain, like Dumas, and back to hero. The king of the underworld kind of
Flip-flops, yeah.
hero to villain to hero to villain. Oaken is his character arc is all about the immortality, turning him into a villain. The brothers and their whole storyline, they're all really nice characters.
It's insane how they packed so much in, so much character development in. It's super impressive. And I think a big part of it is they don't feel like they have to walk you through everything. Like they don't need to spend 5 minutes explaining Hilling's healing powers or that she can refresh it with potions. They just show you that. And they assume that we're not idiots, which I appreciate. There is one moment that I want to throw out there. Episode 21. It's right before Boji and King Boss's Daida are going to fight. It's episode 21 and it's at 9 minutes and 28 seconds.
Okay. Cue it up.
Cue it up. The reason I bring this up is because it's a long shot and it's just a still. And like it shows a big castle wall and then a little Boji in one corner and a little Daida in the other corner. And they're like 3/4 turned and they have that far away like Boji face where it's just 2 dots and a triangle for I laughed. I rewound it 3 times and laughed my butt off.
And it's not even full body shots.
No.
I remember that
just like
shot you're talking
waist
about.
up and they're just like off to the side.
Right.
Just looking hilarious. So if anyone is going to rewatch it or wants to just laugh, go to episode 21, 9 minutes, 28 seconds in, and I guarantee you will laugh.
Here's another little one that I have written down, what I call the transition from Padawan to Jedi Boji. He's in the fire and he's got like the little cup. So it's like a flashback and he's looking down and it's dark and there's like flames flashing on his face and it does a fade to him now and he's standing up straight and he's like super powerful Boji, like that can destroy anything by touching it with a needle.
Yeah, I also have somewhere in here in my notes another one, and I can't find it, but I just added it in so I would know for later. But there's a demon Boji moment too. Kage's saying something about Boji, and all of a sudden it shows him, and his eyes are all like glowing white, and he looks like a little demon Boji.
He can bring the machinery of an opponent's body to a permanent halt with minimal exertion.
Whoa. Boji, you really have gotten stronger.
So there's a lot of cool just little moments like that. I have down as a big plus, something I watched multiple times, is the King Boss fight. And I mentioned this earlier, but I feel like this is a scene that the story was written for, one of them.
Yeah.
And I love how King Boss has taken over Daida's body, but when it comes to this fight, it's between King Boss as a giant and Little Boji. And it's just drawn so well. And the action is so well done as Boji's flipping around this giant. And there's a part where he falls real far and he like somersaults his way through the fall. And he goes from being like Little Boji too like Spider-Man.
Yeah, he's running on the wall.
Yeah, it's super cool. And he like jumps into the castle for a minute and he's all flipping around as the king's club is swinging by him. It was a very, very cool fight, and just kind of that meaning when it goes from being not Little Dyda to actually Big King Boss. I really enjoyed that a lot.
One of my kind of disses too is a lot of the action scenes are not great.
Yeah.
Like when you compare them, especially to like other anime, and a lot of that is due to the kind of cartoony style. It makes it hard to do a sweet action scene when you have kind of rotund little characters and like kind of weird proportions and stuff. But that one was great. And I thought about crossing off the disc. I'm like, well, because that action scene was so good, but the rest of them weren't bad. They just weren't epic.
It was just like a sword hitting another sword.
Right.
And then that's kind of it. Yeah. I think some of Dorsha's were okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's because he had to get more into it because he didn't have a weapon or whatever. But yeah, I can agree with that. Some of them, I mean, obviously none of them came close to even touching that last fight.
Right.
So you talked about Apis a little bit earlier, and I fully understand what his motivation is, but I looked for this in subsequent viewings. It's not really explained super well what Miranjo does for him.
I agree with that.
There's a part where he looks like a wuss, and then there's a part where he has to fight a griffin, and then Miranjo stops the fight because he's getting his butt kicked, and then she like puts her hands on his shoulders and is like, you can do it, and gives him some speech about how he can do it, right? And that's it. That's all we get. And then it goes to all of a sudden Apis is willing to betray the royal family and go with Miranjo because of what? That speech? That was the one that wasn't sold real well for me. So I have that on my disc track.
Apis's psychology, I think, is they keep calling him the spear. There's like an anime trope, right? One guy's a sword, one guy's a spear, one guy. And I think that's also metaphorical where he is wielded by other people. And I think he doesn't always kind of think for himself.
Right.
But I might also be just kind of defending it.
I think that's fair. At the end, the change he makes back is kind of that moment of clarity where he's like, okay, I'm not going to be a tool of others.
Correct.
I'm going to think for myself and make the decision on how I feel. Right. So I think that is sold within the story. All they needed to do, though, is just change up that one scene to be a little bit more impactful. Maybe she gives him a power and we see that, or I don't know, something a little bit more.
I was left wondering if she used magic, but I don't think she did.
Yeah, we don't know. So, but there's so much, like even the Desha statue in the underworld and how its face is all beat in. And then we find out that Desha is actually the one who did that to his own statue because he doesn't like how he looks.
Understandably, because his mouth is way outside of his cheeks.
Yeah.
So,
and it is the one voice actor, because we have had to watch quite a bit of this subbed throughout the various points. The Japanese voice actor, the English voice actor does fine. He does good, I will say.
Yeah.
The Japanese voice actor who does that voice does excellent for that character. It's super. I'm not even gonna try to do it. It's amazing. Though, so.
If we're gonna talk about voice acting, I got to talk about the three-headed snake's voice. I loved it.
Yes.
It wasn't yes, Boshi. We will like as every snake and everything talks. It was 100% just a voice.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Boshi. We will be here to help you if you need us. I loved it.
It had two components to it. One is what you just said. It sounds like one of our voices. Honestly, it just sounds like
just a normal person.
But something about it, every time that snake would talk, like it made me feel good. And I think part of it was because every time the snake talked, it was something positive, supportive, whatever. But man, every time that voice came up, it did give me the feels. And yes, the voice acting was amazing. This is a little bit of a diss. Miranjo breaks, and maybe this is for later, Miranjo breaks a promise to a demon twice. And this gets brought up a lot during the show. And one of them, and I can't even remember, but one of them is made clear.
Anytime I grant a person's wish, my body will be twisted into something more monstrous. It's okay, because I'm never gonna ask you for anything.
The second one is not made clear. I looked for it specifically. So this is like her big hook, her big thing why she's doomed. It was just another piece that I'm hoping they revisit in subsequent seasons, because I'd really like to know more about kind of the dynamic between her and the demon and the promises that she broke to the demon. I think that's really interesting, and there's so much to it. This is a very minor diss. All of these disses are minor. Obviously, we've already talked about how much we enjoy this anime, but that demon character was so interesting to me.
That scene where the demon is like eating souls and they're screaming and then reforming.
And then eating them again.
Yeah, it's like right out of a nightmare. It's so sweet.
Yeah, it's very good. Even the the laugh.
I'll do a little diss too, and this is again, it's like, nitpicky kind of stuff.
Right.
I talked about underdog stories in the past, and usually in an underdog sports story, which is what this is archetypally is an underdog sports story. The underdog usually has some ability that later helps them win. And that is in play here because Boji dodges very well. But I wish there was something about how great his aim was. Because ultimately his power, which I will talk about as my next is aiming very, very well.
Yeah, it's kind of like he gets the dodging from the snake and the aiming from Despa. But there's so much in kind of keeping that training secret, so it becomes a big reveal later as to what his ability is, which I think is cool. I think the, kind of the negative result of that is we don't get told much about his aiming and all that. Yeah.
Well, just when he's fighting Daida and stuff early on, it'd be easy enough because he keeps dodging and then he's like onto his head.
Yeah.
Instead, he should be like into his eye.
Yeah.
Like, and Daida's like, oh, and he's like, oh, that's my bad tooth. Why? It's a comedic moment to hit the head and it does nothing because he has no strength. But it would be interesting if he had that aim was kind of set up.
Yeah, the only thing I wonder is if that's something that Despa gave him, because there's that moment where they hold hands and he's like, let me show you the world how I see it.
Right.
I wonder if the implication is supposed to be that he didn't have that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It would be nice if it was.
That's my next what you're talking about right there, though.
Okay, go for it.
It's kind of two in a row. Okay, I'll Bogart here. It's Despa, right?
Yeah.
I get the brothers confused. Despa, who's a really fun character, has his love for money and...
We'll take our compensation in the form of silver and gold.
A little bit of magical ability. But what he gives Boji is the training ability to basically see the atomic structure of a thing and then pick out where the basically atomic links are weakest and attack there, and then it breaks apart the atomic structure of whatever he's aiming for. But what I love there is it's very rare for a story with magic to use the magic scientifically like that. Like, here's a scientific thing we've learned through magic.
Yeah.
As opposed to some magic and then they might do some science, but they are usually two separate schools that grow up next to each other. So even if you have Star Wars with space travel and the Force, it's not like they're using the Force to understand subatomic structures and whatnot. If you have these magical abilities that let you do so many things, scientific discoveries should be easier. If I can shrink magically, well, I should understand if I shrink small enough, why can't I shrink smaller? What's stopping me from shrinking small? And those kind of things. And so I really like that magic system where they had him being able to see something scientific through the use of magic.
Yeah, it's super cool power. And what a genius way to take a character who has no strength and give them all the strength.
Right.
So usually in anime, it kind of ends one of two ways for the villains. Either at the end, the villains are just forgiven, and sometimes you can feel a little unsatisfied because they did all these bad things, but because they have some sort of tragedy in their life, then the heroes just forgive them because that's how heroic they are. But we're left a little unsatisfied. Or the villains just get destroyed and, they get their comeuppance. And I think here it does a pretty decent job of both, where the villains are forgiven, but they still get ripped up one side and down the other. So whether it's Miranjo having to spend that time in the part where the demon is just eating souls and she's basically in, hell for a while, that type of thing. And then Despot actually comes up to her and rips her up one side and down the other, and she's bawling her eyes out because everyone's just like tearing into her.
You are not yet absolved, young lady.
It's both. So they get forgiven, but it's not without some cost.
I was a little unsatisfied with Miranjo's end, I'll be honest.
Having been so badly wronged and having wronged so many, go and share your story with the generations to come. Perhaps you can save them from such tragedy.
Okay, that's fair. I was more with Daida's, I would say, between the two.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, for me it's as Miranjo because she did so much bad and literally was the cause of so much death and war and destruction, and then it's like she ends up marrying Daida, which is a little goofy. It's almost like if he's Bossy's daughter and mother, it's like you're marrying either your mother or your sister. But
so both. we have the same opinion, but I'm putting that on Daida, where you're giving it on Miranjo. Because Daida's the one that's like, I'm going to marry her, and I'm going to steal the wish out from Despa and Desha, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that.
Demon! Here is my wish. Revive her! Let Miranjo live again!
And then all of a sudden I'm good again, and I'm going to say, Boji, you can be king or whatever. But right before that, I stole the wish, made it so that no one could punish Miranjo, who did all this evil. So I put it more on him. Like, I think his end was...
Daida was punished because he was like stuck in his own personal like mental space where he really had to think about things for a long time. And I feel like Miranjo went from being villain to being queen without really too bad of a punishment. It's like, it's all right.
Do everything we can to make amends. But please, I beg you to forgive her.
And a little bit of time in hell or whatever. Yeah, that's...
Because part of it, too, is like Daida's in the situation kind of beyond his control, so I feel more sympathy. Like, he wasn't a super good person, but he wasn't evil. He wasn't King Joffrey. He was just... thought he would be a better king and probably picked on his brother more than he should.
But also sent Domus to kill him, to be fair.
Yeah, that's fair. Did he send Domus to kill him? Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, he did. So that was, some bullshit too. Anyway, okay, the fish. So I talked a little bit about how there's a few Easter eggy things I picked up on watching this so many times. So at the end, King Bo, who's a character we have not talked about at all, and there's quite a few characters we haven't talked about, comes through, cuts open the rock that Oaken is stuck in, sets him free, which we're like, what are you doing? And then he cuts Oaken's head off and then throws it like a zillion miles into a lake. And then Oaken's head is eaten by this fish with these jaggy teeth.
Yeah.
There is a moment many episodes before where there's like a dream sequence and that fish is in it.
Oh, really? That's cool.
So it's just another really cool callback. There's a lot of these. So watch it. If you enjoy it, I would recommend watching it more than once because you're going to pick up on a lot of cool little things like that. You're like, oh yeah, there's that fish that's going to come up way later.
I'll throw a little diss in here. I'll blend these two together, but because there's one part where it's kind of plotty when they're talking about how the Shadow Clan was tore up to become the Portals, I believe is when they're talking about this. And someone's like, the Shadow Clan, they were pure of heart, but they were all destroyed. They were assassins.
Yeah, they did play both sides of that.
Right.
And the characters were, like the mom was a good character and she was good, but yeah, on the other side, they're also assassins. They're also murdery.
Right. She just killed people for a living.
They tried to set it up as they only murder bad people, right? That whole trope.
Yeah, and then Kage has a moment where he's like, I feel all warm and fuzzy, and it's like really bothering him, and he's like getting red all on his face and stuff, and that's like kind of his character moment. And that's why I was like, well, they should have always portrayed the Shadow Clan as what they were, not great people. I mean, genocide is always bad, even if it's bad, bad, even if it's kind of bad people.
Speaking of genocide, it's going to make me even, because they don't ever say it specifically that Miranjo was the cause of the Shadow Clan all being wiped out. They don't ever make that connection. But if she was the cause of that, that makes her character even less forgivable. It makes me even
Right.
more angry that Daida's like, I'm gonna marry her at the end.
This woman will repay what you've stolen from us.
Do you have anything else on your list?
I have nothing else on my list.
What's cool, I feel that other than some of the Daida Miranjo stuff was a little unsatisfying. I think we both agree on that, even if we feel it on different sides.
But they were side characters anyway, really.
Yeah, yeah. So ultimately, though, I think we would agree that from soup to nuts, from beginning to end, it was a satisfying story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, had a satisfying conclusion, had a satisfying arc, all that. What's also really cool, though, is there's so much woven in that is more stories. So I felt that this was expertly done, where we've got a season where, and I would never do this, but we have a season where you could watch just this one season, never watch Ranking of Kings ever again, and you've got a satisfying story from beginning to end.
Yeah.
However, there's still a lot left to do. Still have to figure out how to save Oaken from his immortality. We have to figure out what's up with the number one ranked king that gets to go into a treasure vault. And there's this Pandora's box thing in the treasure vault that apparently makes the number one on the ranking of kings king go mad or insane or disappear.
That was really interesting because that's another one of those foreshadowing moments, because Boji meets that guy in the woods. And I was like, oh, is this like the worst king? Because he's only king of himself and he's nuts and he's in the woods. And then later on, we learn all this stuff that, oh, when you become the number one king. So you're like, oh, that guy was number one king at some point.
Yeah, and is nuts. Yeah.
And now the king of the underworld is the number one king, right?
Yeah. And you have to use your brain to figure that out because they don't come out and tell you all those things, which is very cool.
Right. I mean, they probably will eventually like show him again and then reveal that he was once the number one, do a little background on him. But you can see it. You can put it together yourself in advance.
Yeah.
If you're as smart as me.
Nice. And there's the whole little demon kid. So there's the little demon kid that looks innocent, and then there's the big evil demon, and then there's this whole mission to like save the demon's soul.
I thought those are not the same demon.
They are the same demon.
Okay.
And that's what I mean by saving, right? Saving the little innocent part of the demon that's trapped within the evil persona of the demon.
Yeah.
Right? So there's still a ton left to do, I guess is the point, which is really cool. So very satisfying story, but they peppered in enough other little lore things where there's still a ton left, where a lot of lesser stories would just be like, all right, we're going to save the king boss Boji fight and all that for the end of season 3.
Right.
And our cliffhanger ending at the end of season 1 is going to be completely unsatisfying. So I'm so glad.
None of those setups were distracting. Either. They didn't feel off the wall. They didn't feel like, oh, I have to put this in here because later on we have to resolve it. They don't feel unresolved, but they are unresolved. They're just setups. Like you said, they don't necessarily need a payoff for the story to be satisfying, but we can pay them off. Like we can leave Oaken where he is.
Yeah.
And that's fine. He turned into a villain. He has a tragic end.
I wish for my brother Oaken to be freed from the...
You!
We would prefer his heroic to tragedy return back to heroic.
Yeah.
But we can leave it as a tragedy.
Well, it's cool because at first it's like, all right, we're going to use the wish to save Oaken. And then when they aren't able to use the wish, Despa reaches out to Desha with their hand communicator, which is another magic thing that they didn't have to over-explain to us through exposition. We just understand it.
Yeah, we get it.
And he's like, I couldn't get the wish. So the guy who does the clown guy who does the ranking of kings is talking to Desha, and he's like, all right, I'll take the number 1 spot, because he was the number 2 spot, because it's kind of like the contingency plan to use this magical madness device to try to save Oaken. So
they kind of knew there were 2 ways to save him, either the wish from that demon or the number 1 ranking of king box.
Madness box, yeah. Right. Pandora's box, whatever it is, yeah. I mean, and done in like 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes max, all that storyline. And we get it, we understand it, and it's still there as a future story. Very, very well done. So,
and plus, not to even mention Boji going off in his next adventure.
Yeah, that doesn't even... it hasn't even touched the biggest one. Yeah, you're right. Good point.
Hopefully it remains the biggest one and we don't have the Vikings guy you always talk about.
Yeah, no Ragnar. That would suck if they no Ragnar'd it.
No Boji.
Yeah, and there was no Boji, and he's just off. Oh, Boji's just doing stuff with Kage. Now let's spend... Yeah, that would be the worst idea. I hope they don't do that. But anyway, if anyone is still listening to our voice, and for some crazy reason you haven't watched...
Voices.
Yeah, Voices. And you haven't watched all of Ranking of Kings, then definitely go watch it.
Yeah.
100%. And if you don't enjoy it, I'm willing to say it right now, you're weird. So, sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
It's you. It's not the...
It's not the show. All right. Anything else you want to say to anyone else about Ranking of Kings?
No, I don't think so. I liked it.
All right. Awesome. 5 for me as well. We still have a ton of really cool episodes coming up. We're going to be talking about... I'm going to throw some out there. Might as well just throw some names out there.
All right. Do it.
We're going to be talking about Thunderbolt Fantasy.
That's the puppet one?
Yeah, they're Taiwanese dolls, to be precise. They're like 3.5-foot Taiwanese dolls. We've talked about doing the beginning of Spy X Family, which is a really popular one right now. We've got some collaborations coming on Gundam Orphans, Erased.
With the aforementioned Simping for Senpai.
Yep.
Gonna join us for that.
Yep. And the Walk the Cinema people for Erased. What else? What else do we have on the list? That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
We'll have some fun, interesting, and possibly controversial topics.
Yeah. Yeah, if you haven't listened to the Ladies in the Animes one yet, go listen to that for sure. That's one of my favorites that we've done. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
It's over for you. You're done. But you'll be back.